Hi and welcome. I'm Tara. I garden here at Wild Bird Farm. We are in Zone 5 in central Iowa. Today we're going to talk about what I think is the easiest way to dip your toes into selling cut flowers. Well, friends, we have both feet in the month of March now, but the weather here in central Iowa is throwing us all over the board. So the shot at the very beginning of this video is what's happening outside right now. And I think if you look out the window, you can even see we have some snow. So we're supposed to get 2 to 4 inches today. The good thing about March is that it's going to warm up next week and there will be no trace of any of this snow. Just 3 days ago, however, we had blizzard conditions. We had 50 plus miles per hour wind. Luckily, the hoop house looks okay, but we lost power for about 36 hours. We do have a generator that we were able to plug in our fridge and our deep freeze. The last day without power, I plugged in my seedlings back in my seedling room because they hadn't had light for over 24 hours. They're looking okay, but man, this season always just is kind of like a roller coaster ride. I'm sure some of you out there are seeing similar things where you're at. Well, today I'm really excited to talk a little bit more about this. I am part of several Facebook groups and I see time and time again new growers very interested in getting into selling their cut flowers, but just not sure how to do that. Now there's lots of venues you can take and we'll just briefly talk about some of the options and then I'm gonna jump right into what I think is the easiest, most cost-effective, most low commitment way to get started selling flowers. I am going into my 5th season of selling cut flowers. Now for me, this is still a side hustle. I have a 9-to-5 job that it would be pretty hard for me to replace that income. Not that it's not a dream of mine, but this has been a very lucrative side job for me. So you might be similar to me in that maybe you have a job you enjoy, but you want to make a little bit of side money. But for me, I wasn't willing to borrow cash to build up this business. So if you want to start kind of from the ground up, start small, and build into something bigger, I think this is a great option for you. So lots of folks, whether they're selling veggies or cut flowers or even flower or vegetable starts, they go to a farmer's market. And if you are someone who has your Saturdays or whatever evening your local farmer's market runs, if you have those days wide open and you would enjoy a weekly cadence of setting up and prepping for that, I think that's a great way to get your name out. When I started this 5 years ago, I had kids in sports every Saturday, and I just wasn't willing to commit that much time to what could possibly be sitting around, especially if we didn't have a vibrant farmer's market. You could also set up a roadside stand. Now, depending where you live, this could be a great option. If you live on a heavily trafficked road or something like that and have a lot of people that would be willing to stop by and grab some of your goods, that's a good option. Although, unless you already have a stand ready to go, there's some expense there getting set up. I made some notes for this one, so pardon me if I look down every once in a while. Another route you could take is wholesale to florists. I think that's another great way to get started. But often when you're a newer grower, you don't have an abundance of the same type of flower, and that's often what florists are looking for. So just keep that in mind. I think it's great to put some feelers out into your community, but if you only have, let's say, 2 peony bushes, you're not gonna get very far versus a whole field. So just something to think about. And then also selling at a wholesale cost is much different than retail pricing. And then finally, one thing that I do here is a U-pick farm. I think that's also a great thing to do. You have a lot of labor up front to get ready, but then throughout the season, your labor is lower because you are having people come to your farm to pick flowers. Now you need to have the right insurance in place. You need to have the right setup so people can safely park and get to the field. You need to have some pretty strict guidelines around what you allow as far as animals and children and things like that, but that's also a good option. So all those I think take a little bit more upfront work and more costs upfront generally. The thing I'm going to talk about today, I feel like is extremely flexible and something that you can get started with just some seeds that you purchase from your local garden store. So let's jump into that. Okay, so have you guessed what I'm gonna say here? My favorite way for folks to get started in selling their cut flowers is to do it with a small local business or boutique. Now, I have several examples of folks I have worked with, but think about who is in your neighborhood. Small independent coffee shops are really popular right now. Bakeries, maybe you have a specialty diner that gets a lot of traffic. It could also be a local supply store or a general store that you might have in your small or mid-sized city. I have sold at several of these. I've sold at a couple of handmade shops. I've sold at a coffee/ice cream place. Let's see what else. Right now I am selling in one of our hometown groceries. So I think these are all great options, and I know it can be a little bit intimidating if you don't know the owner to just stop in. So I'm going to tell you a couple of ways I reached out initially to these business owners. One way I did this was I reached out through their social media. So I was following, let's take the coffee and ice cream shop, for example. I was following them online for a while, interacting a little bit. I just reached out through the messaging system, whether on Facebook or Instagram, wherever they're at, and I just told them a little bit about myself. I live in your community. I'm a small flower farm. I would love to bring in some bouquets just to see how they do. We could do cross marketing, which I think would benefit both businesses, and on and on. So hitting them up on social media, seeing if you get a response there, or just stop into the business. It's great if you have a bouquet or two that you could gift them so they kind of see what you're talking about. But for me, it's really been quite easy to approach people this way. I think I had I've probably reached out to 6 or 8 over the years. Some of them were pop-ups, meaning it was a small hometown shop, but they were having like a spring fling or a fall extravaganza or a summer pop-up, something like that. And I was able to reach out and say, hey, I could bring in a couple of wrapped buckets full of flowers to see how they did. Of course, they would get a cut in the cost. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about selling on consignment versus wholesale here, because I've done both. And I have a pretty strong opinion about it, so stay tuned a little bit further into this video. One thing I also did at a local handmade store was I committed to bringing in flowers twice a week. Because they were a coffee shop, they opened really early in the morning, and this was great for me because I would drop off flowers on my way to my 9-to-5 job. So this business opened up at 6 a.m. I would get there about 6:30, drop off my flowers, and head to my 9-to-5. That worked really well. They were also open until 9 p.m. because they had the ice cream side of the business. So if I needed to go later in the evening, that was easy enough for me to do as well. So that's one thing to consider, hours of operation. Since flowers are a fresh commodity, you really don't have time for your product to be sitting around. You want to bring them in ideally the day or the day before they're going to be sold. So that is something to think about. And if it is someone that isn't open on a normal schedule, I would talk to them more about a pop-up sale. So if you can coordinate with maybe if they're having a spring open house, something like that, you could also have flowers there. You can do a lot of marketing around that. You can cross promote, and I think that's a great way to handle that type of situation. So as I mentioned, for my consistent stores, I brought flowers in twice a week. So I would drop them off generally on Mondays and Fridays. They sold very well. I had a couple instances where they didn't sell quite as well, and I had to make the hard decision not to continue with that relationship. But overall, I've had a really great response doing this. Now, Going to a smaller boutique is also beneficial because let's say you're going out of town for a week, or maybe you have a lull in flowers. It's not a big deal just to not have flowers that week. Early on, I tried both small mason jar arrangements as well as wrap bouquets. And I sold both for a while. Eventually I leaned only to the wrap bouquets. Those seem to go pretty well. I think at a pop-up situation, you could have two types, you could have different price points. I would often bring in 2 buckets. Depending on the size of the bouquet, I could generally fit 5 bouquets in a bucket. So I would generally take 2 buckets each time I went. So that's about 10 bouquets. Now, when I started selling at the grocery store, they had a flower stand that I use, and that held a few more bouquets. And there I solely did the wrap bouquets. But I would suggest trying out both ways and see what's more popular. Depending on what type of area the business is in, a grab-and-go bouquet in a mason jar or a small vase might be nice if it's more of flowers that people will be gifting to others. But I think week over week, if someone just enjoys buying fresh flowers, they generally have a vase at home and they maybe want to arrange themselves. So I noticed that the wrap bouquets did very well from that perspective. So we touched on this being very flexible. If you go on vacation or have a lull in your flowers, you can just take a week or 2 off. Generally with a small business, that's pretty easy to do. Something else is the combined marketing. This is something that was so huge for me. So this small handmade store had a great reach in our local area. She was so great about promoting my flowers each week. She knew that they were a fresh commodity, that they couldn't sit on the shelf long. And while I brought them in Mondays and Fridays, every single Friday, without exception, she was promoting my flowers. I usually put out a post on social media giving everyone a, hey, heads up, fresh flowers at this location. She would often reshare my message, but then she would also take her own pictures and post to her community of followers. This got my name out there as a small grower, and it really helped me promote the flowers that I was selling. I can't stress enough, if you get into a great relationship with someone that has a good social media presence and is willing to promote your goods, that's just a priceless relationship, in my opinion. And then finally, I want to touch on the very low cost to get started selling flowers. So if you are thinking about this right now, you're watching this in real time in March, you're probably going to be shooting for the summertime warm annuals. The great news for you is these are relatively low cost. So these are zinnias, sunflowers, cosmos, maybe celosia or amaranth, something for that spike element, maybe some annual grasses that grow pretty quickly. These are very low cost, start from seed flowers. So your commitment, your investment to try this out this year is super low. And compare that to something like a farmer's market. Maybe it's a higher buy-in. I know the big one here in our metro area is thousands of dollars for the season. That's a big commitment when maybe this is your first year. If you are going to build a farm stand, something like that, there's costs associated with that. Even to get a U-pick field up and running, having all the right, I'm gonna say equipment, but mostly it's the snips, the buckets, the cups, making sure your area is ready for visitors is going to probably cost some money. So I think starting off by reaching out to some local small businesses is a great way to go. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about wholesale versus consignment selling. Now, I've actually been nervous to talk about this publicly because on every forum I am on, there's a couple people that say, absolutely do not sell on consignment. That's just setting you up to have wasted flowers. I have sold on consignment almost exclusively to each of these stores. Now, there were a couple of times where I didn't know someone that was reaching out for flowers. It was especially for like a special occasion or a pop-up, and they were like, I'd like 12 bouquets. Since I didn't know the store or the area or how it would really go, I sold those wholesale. Now, when you sell wholesale, you're generally selling at 50% the cost of your goods. So if you were going to have $20 market bouquets, you would sell them for $10 at a wholesale price. I have found selling on consignment, since flowers are a perishable good, I have been able to do 15% or 20% on consignment. So that means I take the flowers to the venue, and if they sell, the venue gets that 20% or the 15%. Now that coffee ice cream shop and the small local store, they both only took 15%. I know one of them also had a lady bringing in homemade bread, and that's what they had worked out with her. So I really couldn't beat 15%. Now at the grocery store that I am primarily selling to now, they take 20%. So I just want to run through the numbers and compare very quickly the difference between wholesale and consignment and why I think you shouldn't be scared to try consignment. Okay, so all of you check my math here, but if we have, let's say 10 bouquets and they're at a $20 price point. If you were to sell all 10 of those wholesale, they would be sold for $10 each, right? 50% of that retail cost, and you would be bringing in $100. So let's look at consignment. Let's just use 20% because that's an easier number. So if you had, again, 10 bouquets worth $20 and you sold them on consignment, let's say you sold all 10. At 20%, you would be making $160. So that's $60 more than the wholesale cost. Now, granted, an argument will be, well, you aren't guaranteed to sell all of those flowers. So let's say you only sell 8 of those. I often find when I bring in 10 bouquets, generally I'm selling them all, but sometimes there will be 1 or 2 left over. And those are wasted. I do generally throw those away. If they still look really good, if they have a long vase life, I will take them to a retirement home to gift them. But let's say, to make it a little bit more fair, a little bit more to the argument side, we sell 8. So we made 10 bouquets, we only sold 8. At a 20% consignment cost, you're still at $128 that you are bringing home. So when you compare that to the wholesale, you are still $28 ahead of the wholesale selling cost. So let's say you're like, yeah, but wholesale on flowers, we're not cutting 50%. So let's say for those 10 bouquets, while they might mark them up to $20 retail cost, you're not comfortable selling them for cheaper than $12. So you sell 10 bouquets at $12 each, wholesale, you're making $120. Well, even if you compare that to our 8 example, if we have 10 bouquets, we only sell 8, at the 20% cost, that means my take home is going to be $16 per bouquet, which comes out to $128. You are still ahead of those $12 wholesale bouquets. So I'm saying all of this, not because I love math, because I don't, but because I just want you to think things through, especially when you are talking to a shop owner. It is a lot easier sell for you to say, I'm gonna bring in 10 bouquets on consignment. Whatever sells, you get 15 or 20%. Whatever doesn't sell, I come in and I take them home. That to me is an easier sell than, hey, would you like to try to sell fresh flowers in your store? The wholesale price of these is $12 each. For me, consignment was a lot easier sell. It's all on me. I'm doing the delivery, I'm taking the risk of selling the flowers, and I'm doing the pickup and disposal if needed. And this also gives you an out. It's an easy way to say, let's just try it. If it works for both of us, maybe we would continue that relationship. So just something to think about. Now, if you don't agree with this, make sure you leave some comments below because I would like to hear the other side of the coin on this. I believe that wraps things up for today. Let me know what you have for questions. If you are thinking of jumping into this side gig of selling flowers for the first time, let me know where you're hesitating or what questions you have. I would love to help you answer them. Until next time.